That's your lot. Everybody says
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see so many people here today, especially on a wonderful summer's day. My name's Howard Cox, and for those of you who don't know me too well, I was the founder of Fairfield UK for the last 15 years. We've kept fuel duty frozen, and I'm now the proud candidate here, standing as MP for Dover and Deal. So I'm very proud to introduce very much an icon for me, an inspiration to me. That's the Honorary President of Reform UK Party, Nigel Farage.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Dover. Welcome to the front line of the great national debate on immigration, both illegal and legal. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel this general election campaign has got off to the dullest start I can ever remember in my entire life. Two men with the appearance and enthusiasm of middle managers vying to become our national leader. Indeed, I do my best to listen to Keir Starmer when he's being interviewed or giving a speech, and I find myself just zoning out halfway through. There's no energy, there's no optimism, and there's no real substantive policy. As for the Prime Minister, well, I have to laugh. The word bold, that's the word they keep using. Bold leadership. But actually, when he's asked a question by anybody, he looks rather more like a frightened rabbit than somebody that is bold. Now, I'll be getting questions later, I know, about the fact that I decided not to stand. I am, of course, very disappointed. I did have a 6-month plan, which would have had me finding a seat and campaigning around the country. I felt in 6 weeks that I couldn't simply do both. But what I can talk about with some authority is this subject that has affected this harbour at Dover and indeed most of our country over the last few years. It was pretty obvious to me early in 2020 that the trickle of small inflatable rib dinghies that were coming across the English Channel was something that would turn into a flood. But nobody was interested. Nobody was talking about it. And so I came down to Dover. I went out to sea repeatedly. I filmed the dinghies coming over. I filmed the processing centre here in Dover Docks. I went up to the Midlands and elsewhere to film the hotels that these people were being put into. And I said at the time that you might as well put a big sign on the White Cliffs of Dover saying everyone welcome, because we'd stopped deporting people who'd arrived in our country illegally. And it's quite a thought that in the last year of the Labour government, leading up to 2010, 45,000 people who came to Britain illegally had been deported. But we've given up on that. So I said that I thought, unless something dramatic was done, that there would be an invasion. Now, of course, for using that word, I was called all the names under the sun. But 3,800 votes later, 125,000 people later, you can use whatever word you want. I happen to think that invasion, frankly, was pretty appropriate. So I've campaigned hard on this issue throughout this 4-year period, and I'm going to say to you, frankly, I was ahead of the curve on this. I was right. And that's kind of what I've done in my career. I'm an issues campaigner above all. So nobody was talking about it when I started, but you're all talking about it now. And it's worth bearing in mind that 86% of those that come are male, and nearly all of them under the age of 40, most under the age of 30. Unsurprisingly, it's led to a very big national debate. People see the unfairness of it. They say, how can it be that we're on social housing waiting lists for a year, perhaps 2 years, when these people that come illegally are put straight into 4-star hotels or, if not that, private accommodation? How can it be that those that come have access to dental care when we can't get an NHS dentist? And I think the fact that the hotels alone are costing over £7 million a day makes people pretty upset. Those that have come into the country legally aren't very happy about it either, because they've gone through costs, time and hoops to be in the country the right way. But it's the other element of this that I want to focus on today. Frankly, I think this is very dangerous. You only have to look at what's happened in Sweden, in cities like Malmö, to see that a large influx of young males coming from an entirely different culture, and certainly coming from a culture in which women are not even regarded as second-class citizens, has had, frankly, disastrous social effects. But since the events of October the 7th and what has happened in Gaza and increased radicalisation in the Middle East, this is even more of a problem. You see, these young men that come, and I've actually filmed this, I've filmed on the 12-mile median line people throwing their iPhones into the sea, throwing their passports into the sea, doing everything they can so that we can't track and identify them. Although it's okay, because they get an iPhone, a new one, within 24 hours of arrival. But I think this is a national security issue. Now, if you think I'm being over the top, let's have a think about our friend Donald Tusk, who I did battle with in the European Parliament many times, very much an EU lovey, now, of course, the Prime Minister of Poland. He has talked about the wave of, and I'm using his words, not mine, aggressive young males that are coming into Poland, having crossed the Mediterranean, and he has said that this is now a matter of national security for Poland. Well, I put it to you that if it's a matter of national security in Poland, I think what we ought to be doing with this situation here is declaring a national security emergency. And this is an emergency. I talked over the course of the weekend to Trevor Phillips about the small but worryingly growing number of young men, predominantly young men, in this country, adopting radical views, views that aren't just un-British, but views that, frankly, are extremely anti-British. We saw the recent local elections, candidates being elected in inner-city districts, in Leeds, in Burnley and elsewhere. We saw the aggression. And you might have noticed that Angela Rayner yesterday was campaigning in her constituency, begging a group of Muslim leaders to please vote Labour. You'll have noticed not a single woman in the room. So we're moving into an age in our inner cities and towns, I'm afraid, I'm worried to say, of sectarian politics with women completely excluded. I have to say that the Rwanda policy is something that was plucked out of the air by a desperate Conservative government, launched just down the coast at Lyd Airport 2 years and 1 month ago. And Rishi Sunak, of course, has inherited that from Boris Johnson and keeps making promises that planes will go to Rwanda. I am absolutely convinced that the overriding reason for calling a snap early general election is because he knows those planes in July, as he promised, would not be going to Rwanda. They weren't going to go. Rishi can't stop the boats. And he can't stop the boats for the very same reason that the first aeroplane that was on the tarmac and ready to go was stopped, if you remember, by a judgment from a single so-called judge. I say so-called because most of the judges in the European Court of Human Rights haven't actually been legally trained. They're jurists, which is a very odd European concept, at least to us. And he knows that it won't happen. He knows that despite everything that they put in the legislation which disapplies Articles 2 and 3 of the Human Rights Act 1998, he knows that an international treaty goes over, above and beyond that. And planes not going to Rwanda would see the failure of what he believes to be his flagship policy. And that's where the other R comes in. That's where the reform vote, he feared, would have gone a lot higher. So I genuinely believe that's the reason why we've got this early general election. The Conservative policy on Rwanda does not work. We are, I'm afraid, in a situation where our leaders do not have courage to do different. As for the Labour policy, well, frankly, it is a joke. They haven't got a policy. They say get tough on the criminal gangs. We've been saying for decades in this country we would get tough on the criminal drugs gangs. But has that made any difference to the supply of illegal substances? Far from it. In fact, they're being consumed today by more people and in greater quantities than ever before. Those gangs over there on the other side, and we're talking about some very ruthless people, some very dangerous people, those gangs on the other side can make 2 to 3 million euros a week during the months of June, July, August, September, if we get a clear spell of weather. We won't be seeing any boats today. One did set off, but it's gone back. The weather was too bad. So there's no way just going for the gangs is going to make any difference. And in fact, he's even talking about joining up with an EU scheme that might finish up with us taking more people than we are at this moment in time. Neither side has any credible policy at all. The point about Brexit, whether you agree with it or not, it was about restoring sovereignty. It was about being in control. And there is no doubt that the issue that pushed the turnout up in 2016 to numbers that nobody anticipated was the issue of immigration. Mostly, actually, legal immigration, but we'll talk much more about that later on this week. To Brexit voters, what is happening in the English Channel is a serious affront. And they see, frankly, us allowing it to continue as being a betrayal of what they voted for in the referendum and what they entrusted the Conservatives with in that general election and that massive 80-seat majority in 2019. And I have to say, I feel that too, because if you remember, we stood aside. The forerunner to reform, the Brexit Party, stood aside in 319 seats to give the Conservatives a clear run. We didn't want a Corbyn, Lib Dem, SNP coalition, a second referendum, and all that would have gone with it. We must leave ECHR if we want to have sovereignty over our borders. It's just as simple as that. The other parties don't want to do it. And we have to make it very clear, as Tony Abbott did, who of course was the Prime Minister of Australia, who faced exactly the same problem. The only difference was the boats were bigger. They were coming from Indonesia, they were travelling longer distances, they had more people on board. But it was exactly the same issue. They tried all sorts of things. They tried offshore processing. That led to huge rows. In the end, what Abbott said was that nobody that comes to Australia illegally via criminal traffickers on this sea route will ever be given permanent leave to remain. And we have to make that clear. And it's not because we're hard-hearted or bad. I mean, remember this. We've actually allowed 500,000 people to get refugee status in Britain since 2016. We've actually, historically, always been one of the most generous countries in the world when it comes to giving refugee status to those genuinely in fear of their lives. And the other thing that we have to do is we have to have a proper conversation with Monsieur Macron. Hundreds of millions of pounds we've given the French already. I accept on the one hand they have a difficult job because there's roughly 100 miles of beaches from which they can launch these dinghies. There are huge areas of sand dunes. It's very difficult to stop all of the boats. Many would criticise the French police and say they haven't done enough, but it's missing the point. What I showed 4 years ago in the first video I ever did from the channel was escorting. And what happens here is, once a dinghy, and it can be just 200 yards off the beach at Gravelines or wherever it may be, and the French Navy escort the boat all the way to a 12-mile or median line, whereby they hand over the boats and the people to Border Force or the RNLI. The French Navy are aiding and abetting the criminal trafficking gangs. And actually what they should be doing is, which something the Belgians have done to a certain degree, is they should be taking those boats back to mainland France. We have to make it absolutely clear to the French, we will not accept that continued practice of escorts. But without ECHR, none of this is actually going to happen. This is a massive political issue. It's an issue that I've been ahead of the curve on. It's an issue that I've been right on. No one was talking about it then, but you're all talking about it now. And I'm looking forward to a proper, open Q&A with the press, something I don't think the other parties seem to like to do these days. Thank you very much indeed. Right, if you'll raise your hand, tell us who you are. Gwaine, of course, is here. Let's go round the room. Let's go to the state broadcaster first, shall we?
Thank you. Chris Mason, BBC News. Question about the politics, Nigel Farage, of this general election campaign, given what you've been saying in recent months. I'm trying to work out if you're seeking to destroy the Conservative Party or join it.
Oh, they've destroyed themselves. They don't need my help. I mean, that job's done already. What Conservative? Is there a Conservative Party? I hadn't spotted it. I mean, all I can see really are two big social democrat parties. I mean, if you look at economics and many, many other areas, I mean, the policies are virtually identical. Yeah, sure, there's VAT on school fees and there are one or two things, but I can't think there's ever been less of a choice. I can't think there's ever been such a lack of debate, genuine debate. I mean, the economics of this, oh, well, you have to cut this to pay for that. I mean, nobody even talks about the fact we're running budget deficit. So there is a lack of proper debate between two leaders who really politically are not all that far apart. The Conservative Party, and remember those voters, the Red Wall voters, well, they actually were UKIP voters and Brexit Party voters. There was this idea in 2015, hysterical in some of the Conservative press, that if you vote for UKIP, Labour will win. Well, actually, what the UKIP vote in 15 did was give David Cameron a majority, because we hurt the Labour Party far more in the Midlands and the North than anybody had thought. So in a sense, I think of myself as the gateway drug through to the 2019 Conservative vote. And those people did vote for Boris Johnson. And in some ways, you know, I did give them a little bit of a wave, didn't I? I did say, kind of, you know, it's all right if you want to vote for Boris Johnson. And they're the ones that feel completely betrayed, totally let down. It isn't just immigration. It's you know, rafts of self-employed people, small business owners, feeling that Brexit should have brought some level of an easing of rules. And in some areas, actually, the rules have got worse, not better, and that's our fault. Those people are not voting Conservative. In fact, some of the polling we've got for the Reform vote shows that even if we packed up tomorrow, they wouldn't go back to the Conservatives. Some would, a tiny number would, in fact, slightly more might go back to Labour, interestingly. So, no, they've wrecked it for themselves. Now, of course, they'll come out with the same argument, and Mel Stride was doing it this morning. They'll say that a vote for Reform is a vote for Labour. But when the public realise, and they're realising it already, this election is a foregone conclusion. Labour are going to win. And they're going to win quite big. And therefore, you could argue, actually, that a vote for the Conservative Party is a wasted vote. And given that you know Labour are going to win, why not vote for something that you actually believe in? Because here's the problem. The Conservatives will be in opposition, but they won't be the opposition. They are too split, they are too divided, they're too... I mean, goodness me, they've been fighting amongst themselves in government for years. Goodness knows what they're going to be like in opposition. And the important thing about this party, and the reason that I changed the name from the Brexit Party to Reform, was this is a 6-year plan. This is not about a quick hit in a few weeks' time. This has always been, and certainly my thoughts behind it, and Richard Tice agrees totally, this is all about building a base from which we go on and launch a serious assault at the next general election in 28 or 29 or whenever it may be. So I hope and pray that we get a cohort, and we're going to get millions of votes, so that was no question. But I hope and believe we can get a cohort of MPs in Westminster so that we can be the voice of opposition. And as for joining the Conservatives, well, I think honestly, it's more likely that you finish up with a Canada-type situation of 30 years ago, where a party coincidentally called Reform became the new party of the centre-right in Canadian politics. And Stephen Harper, who was first elected as a Reform MP, became ultimately the Premier of a completely brand new Conservative movement. And I think that's where we see ourselves, how we see ourselves looking ahead. It's not easy under first past the post. I've never pretended that it is. Nobody alive knows more than me how difficult it is. But that's the plan. Okay, thank you very much. Where is the microphone? Gentleman there.
Michael Knowles from the Daily Express. You've taken the PM on his record on immigration, but do you think this is going to get better or worse under Labour? And if you think it's going to get worse, aren't you effectively risking that the Channel crisis is going to get even worse in itself?
How could it get worse? How could it get worse? I mean, there's only a certain number of dinghies the traffickers could get their hands on. How can it get worse? And this argument, well, the Tories are absolutely hopeless and have betrayed you, but the other lot are worse. Vote Conservative. They're going to lose anyway. It's the point I made just a moment ago. And I think the public are realising that. They're going to lose anyway. Quite honestly, I don't think, whether it's the Channel or whether it's legal migration, I don't think there's any difference between the Labour and Conservative parties whatsoever. It was Labour that opened the doors in an irresponsible way that has led to these areas that we see where there is a lack of integration. All the Conservatives have done is to accelerate the process. Just look at the numbers. So no, I don't buy that argument in any way at all. Next hand's up. There's a hand. You're all going to get to ask your questions, by the way. Yes.
Do you want me to stand?
If you want to, yeah.
I'll do it. Why not?
Why not?
Alicia Fitzgerald, Times Radio. I just want to clarify an element of your policy, because part of your plan so far is to pick up migrants from the boats whilst in the Channel and to intercept them there. What do you plan to do if the migrants jump into the water?
We shouldn't need to. We shouldn't need to. The French Navy should be stopping the boats from coming. That's the point I'm making. They shouldn't be escorting them. And one of the reasons the French don't do it is the migrants say, oh, if you stop us getting to England, we'll jump overboard. Well, do you know what? They might do it for a day or two, but once they realise the French Navy is serious, that will stop.
But what if it doesn't stop? What if there are some migrants who do cross into British territory and then they do jump into the water? I mean, the seafarers' rules state that you have to save life where possible. What's your plan there?
I know that. I've been involved in a rescue. I was involved in a rescue of Dungeness Point 3 winters ago. Coming into October, we were out fishing in a boat. We saw a kayak that you could have bought for 40 euros in a supermarket. So I've been involved personally in rescuing 2 men who then tipped out into the water. I understand saving lives at sea. I'll tell you what, more people will die if we continue to allow people to cross the Channel than if we intervene and intercept and make sure that it won't be allowed. And this is, above all, the responsibility of the French. When this started in 2018, 19, 20, the average number of occupants of a boat was 14 to 16. And they were the ribs, the quite heavy dinghies, relatively safe. Now they're coming in, made for one-time use boats. They're very flimsy. They've got balsa wood glued into the bottom of them. The average boat size now is 50, but some boats have had up to 80 on. at some point in time there will be a collision in the shipping lanes, in fog, and you will see a huge loss of life. So I understand the question, I understand what you're saying. Migrants threaten to throw themselves in the water, but once people know they can't come to the UK, they won't be allowed to stay, it will stop. As the microphone's there, there's a gentleman there.
Charles Hymas from the Daily Telegraph. Why do you think that you can get a better deal with the French than any of the other politicians? How will you be able to negotiate with them, persuade them to take back migrants?
Well, I think the one thing the French will respect is firmness, and I don't think we've had very much of that. And I do, Charles, reiterate my point that the escorting by the French Navy is aiding and abetting criminal trafficking. And if the French won't cooperate, well, we may have to use the Royal Marines and send some people back to the beaches of France. But I hope it never gets to that, but it may have to come to that. They need to know that we're serious. We've given them a vast sum of money. It is not working, and the French Navy should not, I repeat, not be doing what they're doing. Someone needs to make that clear. Nobody thus far has. Literally nobody. Not a declaration of war. No, we don't intend to have that. But we have to persuade the French army. It used to happen years ago here, I know, but we have to persuade the French that what their navy is doing is absolutely plain wrong at every level. Right now, where's the mic? Who was next? A gentleman there.
Thank you, Nigel. A question about you, if I may. You've had to insist. Thomas Godfrey from the Sun newspaper, sorry. You've had to insist you didn't bottle it by bailing out a standing for election as a candidate, and one of the reasons you said that you'd campaign but not be involved as a prospective MP was because of the US election. So twofold, are you a chicken for not standing, and what do you care more about, electing Donald Trump in America or the success of the Reform Party in Britain?
Well, first question, look, 6 weeks is not long enough to take on a parliamentary seat, and it's me. It's me. I stood for UKIP many, many times, which was a pressure group that used elections to push out its message. And, of course, if we saved our deposit, I mean, that was enough for an all-night party. Never needed much excuse, I know, but... and I've only stood once for Parliament, seriously, and what happened? I stood just a few miles up the road here, and what happened? Third-party campaign groups spent unbelievable sums of money putting negativity through people's doors, the likes of which you can't believe. The Conservatives cheated to such an extent that one of the agents got a 9-month prison sentence for mass overspending. So for me to fight and win any constituency, I'm going to need a lot of time and a lot of data. I can't do that in 6 weeks. So you can call me what you like, but I think realist might be more accurate. But I'm very, very happy to support the campaign, and I want us to have a proper debate. And we started today on this question of illegal immigration and the fact that nobody's offering anything that's going to be a solution. And we're going to move on over the next few weeks to economics and many, many other issues. Now, of course, this general election matters. It matters less than previous ones because it's over already. Such is the collapse of support for the Conservatives. They will not win a single red wall seat. There is absolutely no. I know those voters. There is no chance at all of that happening. The American election is important for this reason. The world is in a worse place, a more dangerous place than it's been at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and even I wasn't born when that happened. Strong American leadership, standing up to bullies, and leading a strong NATO are absolutely vital for our national security. And I believe the world was a much better, safer place with Donald Trump in the White House than it's been with Joe Biden. So that's the context. I'm not saying Britain doesn't matter. Far from it. Of course not. I'm British. I'm here. But I do think who wins in America for global safety is absolutely vital. I genuinely do.
Do you become a Trump advisor if he's re-elected?
I wouldn't become an official Trump advisor if he was elected. Unofficially, well, look, he's a friend of mine. He's a friend of mine. And wouldn't it be nice to have a pro-British president back in the White House rather than one that absolutely loathes us? Okay, yes.
News.
Hello.
You talk a lot about British values. What are they?
I didn't talk a lot about British values.
You did on Sunday with Trevor
well,
Phillips.
I think women playing a part. I mean, you're here, which is interesting because if you were at an Angela Rayner meeting, I doubt you'd be welcome. And indeed, if you see the victory celebrations from the local councillors, from Burnley to Bradford to Leeds to elsewhere, no women. This is a new form. And by the way, this doesn't affect. The idea that I'm saying this is all British Muslims is absolute nonsense. I think the most concerned group, the most worried group about what's going on with this new form of sectarianism are British Muslims who are working, paying their taxes, wanting their kids to do well. It's them that perhaps are going to be the worst affected by this if this current unpleasant trend continues. So that's one thing I would say. Attitudes towards homosexuality, many other social issues. Of course, there are social conservatives in the Roman Catholic Church and elsewhere, and I understand that, but not perhaps quite to the same degree. But I tell you the thing that I thought was alarming, maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't, but I thought in that recent JL Partners poll, and we don't see many polls that actually look at the Muslim population and their attitudes, but when 23% of 18 to 24-year-olds say they support the concept of jihad, I put it to you, that's not exactly a British value. And I think that's what we should be concerned about. And look, it's obvious to everybody that since October the 7th, there has been increased radicalisation in this country. And I'd never have thought that I would speak to some friends who've got a Jewish girl at a British university who's getting, not teasing, but real abuse to the point of, well, do I really want to be part of this? So I think there are some very disturbing trends. And I think our British values are pretty clear. And I really worry about sectarian politics. That's what it is. We've seen it in Northern Ireland, and I now see it creeping in to parts of England, and I'm very concerned by it. Right, OK, we've got a couple of hands still up.
Maya Tusi from 2CTV. We've heard a lot from Reform UK in terms of policies to stop the boats, whether it's to leave ECHR or return the boats. What's your ideal situation for thousands and thousands of illegal migrants who are already here? Mass deportations, amnesty, or something else?
No, amnesty is a disaster. The only people that support amnesties are people like Boris Johnson, who did support an amnesty when he was Mayor of London. And if you have amnesties, all you do is give a big message, please come. Look, I make the point again. The Labour government of 2009-10 deported 45,000 people who've been here illegally. That's the only message you can send. If you come to the country, you won't be allowed to stay. And you know what? They'll stop paying 3,000 or 5,000 euros to traffickers if they know that's the message. Right, there was one more hand up there, and then we'll... Okay.
Nigel, Emma Core, LBC. What's the incentive for Rishi Sunak to debate you? What's in it for him?
Oh, he's very keen on debates. Hadn't you heard? He wants to have 6 debates with Keir Starmer. Well, all I'm saying is have one with me. And many will say, well, why you? Why should he debate you? Well, there is a precedent for this. In 2014, Nick Clegg was the Deputy Prime Minister of the country, and he challenged me live on LBC. He challenged me to a debate because he saw that I was the leading voice for leaving the European Union. So Clegg and I did that debate, and then subsequently we did one with the BBC as well. If you can tell me there's somebody with a more prominent voice that has spoken more about the situation here, then please tell me who it is. If this is his flagship policy, and you really believe in it, Mr. Sunak, come and debate it with the person who spent years studying it and campaigning on it. That's why I think he should do it. Yes.
Thank you, Nigel. Harry Hilton, ITV News. You've made clear that your campaign is primarily focused on attacking the Conservative Party.
No.
Well,
I said Starmer had no policy and he was useless.
But most of your attacks today are focused on Rishi Sunak and his promises as Prime Minister. Do you accept that by entering this campaign, you are going to make Keir Starmer and Labour's job easier?
Look, the point is, Sunak is selling something to the British public that is wrong and dishonest. That's the point I'm making. Oh no, Starmer's got nothing to offer in any way at all. I'll debate Keir Starmer on it if you want. I could just about stay awake that long enough. I'm sure I could. It's all of them. And it isn't just this. There's so many areas we're not having a proper debate. As I said earlier, when I did conferences like this in 2013, 14, 15, you all said the same thing. You'll let a Labour government in because all the people that vote for you will be Conservatives. The fact is, if reform gets momentum in this campaign, they will start to eat very deep into the patriotic old Labour vote. Right at the moment, that's more distorted because it's coming from 2019. It's coming from those voters who'd come from Labour, through UKIP, through the Brexit Party to the Conservatives. But that makes no difference to the Conservatives. That's gone anyway. They've destroyed themselves without any help from reform, without any help from me. So I genuinely think we're not heading for an election where, you know, on the Sunday breakfast table before election day, families say, well, who do we want to win, or who do we least want to win, which is often under first past the post how we vote. We often vote for the least worst. I think by then Labour will still be so far ahead in the polls that it'll give people freedom to vote for what they actually want. And I do believe that the manifesto, the agenda that reform is building up, is the right one for opposition in the next 5 years. OK, Gawain, yep.
Hello, it's Anahita Hossainpour from PA News Agency.
Yes.
So Richard Tice said earlier this month that it would not be easy to run an effective ground campaign at the next election on the money coming into the party. How much is funding a setback for the party's viability going forward into the election and afterwards? Well,
part of the plan, of course, was to raise money in the next 6 months. I mean, I'm here in Dover today. I mean, I actually, there's no point hiding it. I would have been launching myself this week, but he got in first. So there you are. He didn't just do me over. I think he did many of his own party over as well, in fact, doing it. Yeah, no, funding is an issue. Funding has been an issue. There's no question about that. We're not very well funded at the moment. But we do have quite a considerable database. I'll be reaching out to them tomorrow to say, come and help us. Now, are we going to have the 20, 30 million that Labour and the Conservatives have? No. But we do have a message. And that message is distinct, and it's clear, and it's different. And often, political parties spend huge amounts of money that they simply waste on billboards and messages that no one sees and no one hears. And if I tell you what, I challenge you, go into the streets of Dover this afternoon and ask people one memorable phrase they've picked up from Sir Keir Starmer so far in this election, and I tell you what, nobody will have an answer for you. So no, these are challenges. Of course they're challenges. Challenges of party structure, challenges not of enthusiasm, but of structure, of money, of size. Yes, these are handicaps that reform have, but this is just the start. This is part of a 6-year plan. Okay.
Hello, Charlotte Wright from BBC South East. In your speech today, you've used terms like invasion, disastrous social effects, saying we should be declaring a national security emergency. Mm-hmm. How would you respond to people who accuse you of cynically using inflammatory language to stoke culture wars?
Well, I mean, if 3,800 boats and 125,000 people isn't a sort of slow-motion D-Day in reverse, I don't know what is. But if you don't like the term, then fine. But I predicted an invasion, and I think we've seen one. And sometimes in politics and national debate, you have to use words that make people stop and think. All I've ever tried to do, whether it's on Europe or this subject or debanking or whatever it is, the thing that I've been good at is to get people to debate things and to make their own minds up. And so I think some of the abuse and some of the complete misquotes I've had since sitting down with Trevor Phillips. Incidentally, isn't it funny that Trevor Phillips was suspended from the Labour Party for making very similar comments to me just a few years earlier? I'm not completely on my own with worrying about this problem of these young people who are becoming completely detached from our society. It's real. So I would argue with anybody that wants to be abusive that abuse is a way of avoiding debate. And rather than being rude, come and debate with me. I'm happy to debate with anybody on any of these points because I feel really confident when I say that I think what I said on Sunday reflects a growing sense of unease that is being felt by a huge number of people in this country that something is going very badly wrong. Thank you. Okay. Right. This is the last one. Great stuff. Gwen.
Ray Fidden from the Financial Times. Nigel, you mentioned that UKIP was a pressure group. That's how you described them just now. But at its peak, it had hundreds of councillors. You were winning by-elections and Westminster seats. Reform's only managed to scrape 2 council seats in the recent local elections. It struggled in by-elections to even push the Conservatives into 3rd place. How would you describe the Reform Party as it stands?
Well, exactly 30 years ago this week, I was campaigning on the streets of Eastleigh as UKIP's first ever adopted parliamentary candidate for a by-election after it had died in slightly strange circumstances. And yeah, all through the 1990s and all through the early noughties, I stood for UKIP, and we never got anywhere. As I joked earlier, saving a deposit was an excuse for a celebration. We took the view that think tanks have their place, pressure groups have their place, but if we could fight national elections and get 25 million leaflets delivered by the post office through people's doors, that was a better way of promoting our message than anything else. It wasn't really until 2011, 2012, when UKIP started to win seats and started to become a major national party. And there's the point. It took 20 years. It took UKIP 20 years to become a serious political force. It won't take Reform 20 years, but I do think we can do it within 6. So, yeah, there are, and I said to PA earlier, and I accepted, there are weaknesses. We don't have that base on the ground. We don't have that voluntary structure on the scale that the other parties do. But in the room with you today are a number of candidates who are standing for us in Kent. It's very, starting again from scratch is very, very difficult. And, Richard Tice has kept this thing going over the last few years. Many times been told he's wasting his time, there's no need, there's no gap in the market. He's done it at considerable time and cost to himself, and I pay full credit to him because Reform is going to be here, and it will be here for the next 6 years, because I repeat the point, the Conservatives will be in opposition, but they will not be the opposition.
Is this you back full-time to deliver that 6 years?
I am back for this campaign. I will be helping in America later in the year. There's no doubt about that. But do I have personal ambitions looking ahead towards 28, 29? Well, yes, but somebody younger and better might come along. And I have to accept that. I'm blooming 60. I mean, crikey. If my health holds, and frankly, it's not been better in 20 years. If my health holds, then I want to be part of this big fight running up to the next general election. Yes. Thanks, everybody. I've done my best. One more. Sorry, I apologise. Yes, of course. I didn't see your hand up.
Thank you, Nigel. I thought you were going to run scared from being quizzed by the Guardian.
I never run scared of anything. Least of all the Guardian.
I mean, you've been criticised
I know, for years.
Specifically by Jewish and Muslim groups over the years for using Islamophobic and anti-Semitic dog whistles.
What, both? I've done both. Look, so everyone hates me. I'm like Millwall Football Club, aren't I?
On a serious note, Nigel, people across the country are really proud of British values that are accepting of people of different faiths. Mm-hmm. So why should voters trust you? Why should they bother voting for you?
Look, as you say, you can't call me Islamophobic and anti-Semitic in the same sentence. I'm used to a shed load of abuse, and I rather enjoy it, but it needs to be a little bit more consistency, in my opinion. Look, I will always get attacked because I've always been prepared to put my head up and talk about things that other people would rather brush under the carpet and say it's just too awkward in polite society. I absolutely am proud of the fact that of all the countries in Europe, in the post-war period, we had the best levels of integration through immigration. We were streets ahead. We were streets ahead of France, of Germany, of all of those countries. We've got an amazing record, when it comes to granting, whether it's Huguenots or Jewish people or Ugandan Asians. So I subscribe to all of those things. The reason I say what I say is this has all gone out of kilter. I repeat the point. From Windrush till the turn of the century, net migration into Britain ran at 30,000 a year. It's now running at 750,000. The thing is out of control. And I've noticed this, whether it's in politics, whether it's in business, whether it's in sport or science or whatever it may be, if you dare to say something that is not the current prevailing orthodox view, you're always written off as being mad and bad. All I can say to you personally is I don't hold any of those negative motives whatsoever, but I do think that our liberal establishment have forgotten what proper debate is. I do think that our educational establishment have stopped teaching young people critical thinking. And I do think that our country is, frankly, going downhill. We're in decline, socially, economically, and in many, many other ways. And as I will lay out on Thursday, mass immigration into Britain has gone from being a success story, a unique success story in Europe, to something now that is a terrible burden and is damaging the quality of life of literally every single person in this country. Thank you, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen.